In the cold marbled corridors of Buckingham Palace, power is never truly lost. It merely transfers. But the manner of this transfer is what has left the world horrified. Just weeks after King Charles III's secret decree stripping Queen Camilla of all future authority was leaked, the focus has shifted from the king's ruthless decision to the two silent architects behind the entire conspiracy, Princess Anne and Prince Edward. This was no noisy revolution. This was a silent coup, an unbeatable strategy so meticulously designed that even the most astute eyes within the palace failed to recognize it until it was far too late. The horrifying secret is this: Anne and Edward didn't just wait for Charles's decree. They orchestrated it. They designed the systemic process of power drainage, turning Camilla from a powerful queen consort into a smiling wax figure in a matter of weeks. Internal sources, those who witnessed the cold precision of this campaign, call it the soft removal strategy. It operates on one principle: no public confrontation, but rather turning Camilla's absence into an undeniable fact. The goal was to ensure the public saw Camilla still appearing, still smiling, while internally her entire power apparatus crumbled into dust. This is a level of power manipulation so shocking that even political veterans would recoil. It all began with the simplest thing: the calendar. In the weeks leading up to the leak of the decree, Anne and Edward worked tirelessly with senior advisors and logistical teams. No one suspected a thing, as they are known to be among the hardest-working and most loyal royals. But under this pretense, they silently erased Camilla's name from critical strategy meetings, supreme diplomatic events, and the guest lists of decision-making dinners. For example, a crucial annual meeting for the Royal Education Initiative, an area where Camilla had built considerable influence, was suddenly held without her. Edward, as the new designated authority, quietly presided, passing vital decisions without Camilla's knowledge. When her advisors inquired, the answer was always, the Queen Consort has a private schedule. Prince Edward's representation is sufficient. Princess Anne, known for her forthright and uncompromising nature, assumed the role of the gatekeeper, blocking every single attempt by Camilla's inner circle to gain access to King Charles. Anne turned protecting Charles from inappropriate influences into her sacred duty. Anyone attempting to arrange a private audience between Camilla and Charles had to first navigate the steel wall named Princess Anne. Edward, meanwhile, took on the task of destroying the financial and patronage network. Every board, every charity foundation where Camilla held primary patronage was meticulously reviewed. Edward quietly replaced Camilla's name with his, or Anne's, in the legal documents, a silent move without public announcement. Camilla's true power, which lay in coordinating funding and influencing organizations, was being drained from the roots without her ever knowing. This strategy proved a mind-blowing truth about power. Physical presence is irrelevant when strategic absence is executed perfectly. While Camilla was still visible to the public, these silent architects had finished digging the grave of her influence. And this was only the prelude to the horrifying collapse. The quiet dismantling of Queen Camilla's authority wasn't merely an act of political repositioning. It was driven by a single, horrifying imperative laid out by Princess Anne and Prince Edward, protecting Prince William's ascent to the throne. The internal fears within the palace escalated when Charles confessed during the secret meeting that Camilla's increasing influence was shaping the future I never intended. But according to sources deep within the council, Anne and Edward provided the unflinching evidence that turned Charles's regret into a ruthless, necessary action plan. They presented Charles with a damning, meticulously compiled dossier detailing Camilla's alleged interference, a calculated effort that went far beyond mere suggestions. The focus of the dossier was specific and utterly shocking. Camilla was reportedly overstepping her bounds by attempting to influence William's preparation for the throne. She was said to be pushing for key appointments and structural changes within his future staff and household moves that prioritized personal loyalty to her own growing faction over unwavering duty to the crown itself. Anne, known for her staunch devotion to royal protocol, reportedly delivered the ultimate warning to her brother, the king, in the starkest possible terms. Her influence has reached a point where it no longer aligned with royal duty, but personal ambition. This was the ultimate betrayal in the royal world, the crime of ambition being placed above the sacred integrity of the line of succession. Prince Edward, usually the more reserved voice in royal politics, shockingly agreed with Anne, lending an undeniable, devastating weight to the argument. For the first time, Charles faced a completely united front from his two most trusted siblings, who were aligned not in opposition to a person, but in uncompromising defense of the monarchy's long-term legacy. This became the Anne Edward Manifesto, securing the future of the crown by instantly and permanently neutralizing Camilla's inner circle. Their strategy wasn't to engage Camilla in a public battle, but to strangle her network of influence. They ensured that by the time Prince William was ready to reign, his entire team would be loyal only to the crown, not to the dethroned queen consort or her ambitions. They systematically began blocking her access to key advisory figures. Any council member or private secretary who had shown undue favoritism towards Camilla's agenda suddenly found their lines of communication to Charles cut off. Anne and Edward became the gatekeepers of the king's ear, forcing those who wished to remain in favor to swiftly pledge their allegiance to the new order, thereby swiftly and completely isolating Camilla. This was a political masterstroke, a supreme act of royal maneuvering that revealed a calculated precision the public never knew the siblings possessed. Camilla was still queen consort in name, but behind the heavy oak doors, her every move was predicted, countered, and permanently neutralized by the very family Charles had placed his absolute trust in. The truth is horrifying. Charles didn't just remove Camilla. Anne and Edward delivered the ruthless blueprint for her silent expulsion. For Queen Camilla, the initial weeks were not marked by a thunderous official decree, but by a creeping, chilling silence. Her world didn't end with a bang. It dissolved in a series of quiet, bureaucratic paper cuts, orchestrated by Anne and Edward. She first noticed the change not in Charles's demeanor, but in the empty spaces on her calendar and the sudden, clinical distance of the staff. Events she was scheduled to co-host mysteriously vanished, explained away by vague terms like schedule conflict or private rest. Her aides, loyal servants who had been with her for years, were systematically and silently reassigned to other minor royals with zero explanation. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was erasure by design. The horror truly dawned when she was utterly excluded from the Royal Commonwealth Strategic Session, an annual event where she had spent a decade building considerable influence. For the first time, her chair was empty, and her name wasn't even included in the minutes. The message was clear, brutal, and unforgivable. Her role was no longer required. Her voice was no longer valued. This silent, psychological torment, this controlled dismantling, was a deliberate masterpiece of cruelty crafted by Anne and Edward. They knew a public firing would create scandal, but this slow internal collapse would leave Camilla looking present, yet powerless. Desperate to break the suffocating silence, Camilla allegedly launched her own counterattack, a final, reckless attempt to reclaim what was hers. She stormed into Charles's private study, unannounced and demanding the truth. She had absorbed the humiliation for weeks, Catherine, seamlessly filling the space she once controlled, her influence vanishing, but the weight of it all became unbearable. Staff members nearby overheard raised voices, her voice cracking with anguish and betrayal. "I gave you my life," she allegedly cried, a sentence that must have cut through the quiet like a blade. She pleaded for justification, for regret, for anything she could cling to. But Charles's response was the final defining blow of her political career. Cold, definitive, and surgically detached. "This isn't about you," he told her. "It's about the crown." That statement, according to deep sources, broke her in a way nothing else had. The man she had stood beside through decades of scandal had just drawn a line and left her permanently on the other side of it. The stage was set for the final, catastrophic climax. The signed, sealed royal decree that would leak and shatter everything she thought she had secured. The final, decisive blow against Queen Camilla was not a whispered rumor or a cancelled event. It came in the form of a signed, sealed royal decree. a document so ruthless and absolute that few inside the monarchy ever believed Charles would authorize it. The royal seal glistened under the candlelight as King Charles etched his signature, sealing Camilla's fate with one final, trembling stroke. The decree was not merely a reduction of influence, it was a total, absolute elimination. It declared that from that day forward, Queen Camilla shall hold no authoritative rights in royal governance, protocol, or succession matters. All future authority was immediately reassigned to Princess Anne and Prince Edward. The two individuals Charles believed embodied loyalty without the taint of ambition. This was a symbolic realignment as much as a legal one, a calibrated act of distrust. Within hours of the signing, Camilla's name was excised from multiple royal foundations and councils. Boards she once led were silently restructured. Her title labeled non-essential, the erasure was complete, surgical, and absolutely final. But the true horror was hidden in the final clause, a devastating, unforgivable stipulation. Her family, including her children and grandchildren, would be permanently barred from any future royal positions or benefits. It was not just Camilla's power being stripped away, it was her entire lineage being severed from the monarchy's long-term structure. This single clause revealed Charles's absolute determination to secure a future free from what he now perceived as a destabilizing influence. When the contents of this decree, marked confidential, were leaked within 48 hours, they became the biggest royal revelation in a decade. Speculation erupted, not just because of Camilla's fall, but because of the massive internal fractures it exposed. The most shocking reaction came from Prince William. A senior aide delivered the news, revealing a decision he had not been consulted on, a choice with massive, defining implications for his future reign. William was reportedly blindsided. His stunned silence became yet another crack inside a family already under immense strain. William's omission hinted at a deeper, more profound betrayal than the one against Camilla. Charles had executed a plan to protect William's future, but he did so by isolating his own son from the decision-making process, forcing William to learn of the seismic shift with the rest of the world. This omission was deliberate, signaling that Charles, guided by Anne and Edward, was making decisions above the heir, prioritizing the institution's survival over familial trust. As the internal war raged, and the royal council, meant to serve with discretion, descended into a terrifying epicenter of betrayal, one person refused to stay silent, and her emergence changed everything. While the palace was gripped by chaotic infighting, Princess Catherine, Kate, emerged, not with rage, but with quiet, devastating precision. She didn't need a decree. She didn't need an announcement. She simply stepped into the void of power left behind by Camilla's shocking expulsion. The moment Catherine boarded the royal jet to represent the crown on an international envoy, visit a high-profile mission Camilla had long considered her own, the message was unmistakable. The future lies elsewhere. Royal insiders immediately coined the term the Catherine effect. Foreign dignitaries greeted her with reverence, and the press, once divided, applauded her calm, confident leadership amid the royal unrest. Catherine didn't need to speak of the leak, the decree, or the council's divisions. Her poise did all the talking. At home, the public response was immediate and overwhelming. Polls showed surging support for Catherine as the true modern face of the monarchy, with her approval ratings eclipsing every other royal, including King Charles himself. In a time of profound uncertainty, Catherine, without theatrics or ambition, had become the monarchy's only point of unquestionable stability. This rapid, effortless ascension was a new kind of torment for Camilla, a silent form of humiliation masterminded by the shifting power dynamics. Camilla's replacement didn't just match her presence. She exceeded it, redefining the throne Camilla once believed was hers. The symbolic gestures were not accidental. Just days after her triumphant envoy return, a private meeting was scheduled with Charles. No aides were present, but multiple sources confirmed the powerful, concise words Catherine delivered to the king. "You chose wisely." It wasn't triumph. It was a restrained, powerful clarity, honoring the devastating weight of the decision Charles had made. Then came the mind-blowing gesture no one missed. During a public engagement, Catherine wore a delicate brooch once owned by the Queen Mother. This was a jewel Camilla had reportedly coveted for years. It had never been passed to Camilla. It had been kept in the vaults, waiting. Now Catherine wore it like a silent, powerful proclamation. She wasn't just stepping in for Camilla, she was stepping beyond her. Catherine was not merely queen consort material, she was the monarchy's new goddess. The humiliation of the Catherine effect was the fuel, but the final, catastrophic trigger was the utter emotional abandonment by King Charles. Queen Camilla, who once commanded palace rooms, found herself reduced to tears behind closed doors, pleading for answers that would never come. Her final confrontation with Charles wasn't regal. It was heartbreak in its purest, most devastating form. It happened late one evening when the palace had quieted, and only a handful of staff remained. Camilla, having absorbed the silent torment for weeks, burst into Charles's private study without waiting to be announced. Her emotions, which she had so tightly controlled, became unbearable. Staff members nearby heard raised voices, hers cracking with anguish, his muted and unresponsive. She demanded to know why the man she had stood beside, through decades of scandal and isolation, had allowed her to crumble in silence. "I gave you my life," she allegedly cried, a sentence that cut through the quiet like a blade of glass. Yet, Charles offered nothing, no justification, no regret, not even an explanation she could cling to. He stood motionless, withholding every answer she sought. His silence, more than any decree or council vote, was the final, horrifying confirmation that her chapter had ended. It wasn't just removal from power, it was absolute abandonment. Moments after the confrontation, Camilla's distress became overwhelming. Sources claim she collapsed in one of the adjoining corridors, her body unable to bear the emotional strain that had been intensifying day by day. Emergency medical personnel were called discreetly, and she was transported under the cover of night to a private medical facility. Doctors later described her condition with the polite, clinical phrase, stress-related exhaustion, masking the true emotional devastation beneath it. Inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Staff members who had served Camilla for decades were torn between loyalty and grief, shaken by the realization of the coldness that had replaced years of partnership. Quiet conversations among senior aides revealed sympathy for Camilla and a dangerous resentment toward the king. Charles's response from this point onward was meticulously detached. He sent flowers to her bedside, a gesture polite enough to be acknowledged, but empty enough to sting. There was no visit, no apology, no reassurance. Those close to Camilla viewed the flowers as confirmation that her role, both personal and political, had been reduced to a mere formality. With Camilla confined to quiet isolation, recovering from her breakdown, the monarchy found the space it needed to reset its direction with chilling efficiency. Her erasure had already begun. Now, with her silence, it was made absolute. While Camilla faded from the public eye, recovering in enforced isolation, the royal council wasted no time. A new chapter had begun behind the palace walls, cynically codenamed Operation Sovereign Realignment. Charles's plan to restore public trust and future-proof the monarchy was now in full, ruthless motion, led decisively by the new triumvirate, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Catherine. The shift was not cosmetic. It was a total transfer of power. The Royal Council formally approved a restructuring of all senior royal roles. Princess Anne was appointed the chief guardian of traditional legacy. Prince Edward was entrusted with stabilizing international diplomacy, and Catherine, the new face of modern royalty, was tasked with future generational engagement and rebuilding public trust. Together, they formed a new, unshakable triangle of influence rooted in loyalty, clarity, and forward vision. The public facade of the monarchy underwent a quiet, clinical rebranding. Official materials emphasized new keywords like stability, transparency, and service. Photographs prominently featured Anne, Edward, and Catherine, subtly signaling who the institution now leaned on. Approval ratings surged immediately. The monarchy, for the first time in months, appeared calm, controlled, and utterly ready for the future. but the symbolic gesture that shook the palace to its foundations was unbelievable. Camilla's official portrait, which once hung proudly in strategic planning rooms, was quietly removed. It was replaced not by another living royal, but by a restored portrait of Diana. The message was beyond shocking. The past Charles had desperately tried to rewrite was now back in place, acknowledged, framed, and preserved. In this single act, the monarchy subtly, yet firmly, declared which legacy it would carry forward. Despite the realignment, Prince William remained a figure of deep internal tension. Invited to join the transition, he made one thing terrifyingly clear. He would only do so on his terms. Sources close to the prince revealed he had grown dangerously distant from his father, disturbed by how the entire chaotic expulsion had unfolded. His reluctance to fully participate was called a quiet protest, hinting at a deeper fracture yet to come. Meanwhile, Princess Anne had been given one final, critical task: rewriting the guidelines for future royal spouses. The idea was simple and brutal. Never again would personal ambition compromise constitutional structure. The revised draft was said to prioritize duty over relationship, legacy over influence, a direct, unforgiving response to the chaos Camilla's ascension had created. The final vestiges of Camilla's influence were being erased, ensuring her era was a closed, isolated chapter in royal history. Just when the storm seemed to settle, one final, mind-blowing revelation would shatter the monarchy once again, exposing the ultimate truth behind King Charles's actions. Hidden in a sealed envelope within Charles's private study lay a letter addressed to the future of the crown, a document holding his confession, his legacy, and a terrifying warning. The letter had been dictated to the royal notary nearly 6 months before the current crisis erupted, before the council fracture, before Camilla's collapse, and before even the first whispers of succession restructuring. Charles, having just returned from a discreet health evaluation and facing his own mortality, decided to leave behind more than just protocols. He left behind a record of truth. In this document, Charles speaks not as a ruler, but as a husband and a father burdened by legacy. He writes of his profound fear, not of Camilla herself, but of her growing, unchecked circle of influence. He feared that her family, if left unchecked, could derail the sacred institution he had spent his life preparing to inherit. He confesses that what had once been a partnership of love had morphed into something else entirely, a bitter contest between public duty and personal loyalty. And in that contest, he chose the crown. The letter offers unflinching praise for the architects of the new order. He writes that Princess Catherine is the crown's strongest pillar, not just in appearance, but in spirit, calling her unwavering, intuitive, and the embodiment of everything the future monarchy must represent: grace under fire and strength without arrogance. Of Anne and Edward, he calls them the two constants in a sea of shifting tides. They never sought power, he writes, which is exactly why they deserved it. But it is his words to William that carry the most emotional weight, a plea not just for forgiveness, but for liberation. "You will carry everything," the letter reads, "my regrets, my decisions, my failures. But do not carry my fears. Lead with heart, not history." Charles knew the cost of letting the past steer the future, and he hoped his son would learn from that devastating lesson. Then came the line that has haunted every royal who has since read the letter, the final, terrifying justification. Sometimes, to save the future, you must bury the past. It was not an attack on Camilla. It was an elegy for everything Charles once held dear and had to let go in the most ruthless, calculated way possible. The operation was complete. The past was buried. The future, though scarred, was secured.